Welcome to Face2Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face2Face.
So my next interview is with Brett Gaylor, and we had a blast, or at least I did. I'm pretty sure Brett did too, talking about his new CBC film called The Internet of Everything. And you can check out more about the work that Brett's been doing on and around the internet for the last few years on his website. Check him out, brettgaylor.com. Brett and I get into a whole lot of things. I mean, his film is really quite brilliant in so many ways. He's really it's thoughtful, it's sensible, it's balanced for all the right reasons, and it really raises some questions that are clearly essential, I think, actually, to us. And when I say us, I mean all of us, draw a circle around the globe, moving forward, to all of us moving forward in a healthy and a relational way that's rooted in unison. How's that, Brett? Hopefully, if you're listening, you just smiled. So stay tuned. Coming right up, just a fun, interesting conversation. We talk about gadgets, and we talk about 3D printing and why that matters. We talk about activism and learning how to respond in a crisis, and we talk about advertising on the internet and a digital arms race. What, pray tell, is that? And ubiquitous computing, and why it's important to ask the right questions about what this thing called the internet really is. And 30 years in, it seems like maybe it's a bit late, but as we'll find out, it's not really about being good or bad or neutral. It's really about these things called legal guardrails, which I just love that phrase, and ethics, and making wise decisions. And so check it out, listen in. I think you're going to really enjoy not only the interview, but the film as well. And don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my speaking and writing. You can order a copy of Real Change is Incremental there if you want. I would love it if you did that, actually, but consider booking me to speak at an event you've got coming up in the not-so-distant future. I'd love that too. And don't forget that you can also advertise on Face2Face if you're interested in doing that. We've got a newsletter that goes out once a month, shout-outs during the podcast, of course. You can also advertise online. And don't forget, I also appear on rabble.ca. There's a whole host of other writers and journalists and thinkers and podcasters there too, but Face2Face also appears online on rabble.ca, so check that out, and please share this with your friends and your family. Sign up for the newsletter. And we'd love it if you would support us on Patreon. We've got a couple of sponsors there now, not many, but we have a few. We would love that. You can find us there on patreon.com. And if you can't do that, and I totally get that, folks, I would really appreciate it. And I know what a pain in the neck it is, but I would love for you to leave a review on iTunes for Face2Face Live. I would really appreciate that. I want to continue to create some digital noise about this podcast and about this conversation that I've got going on. Stay tuned. Brett Gaylor coming right up, The Internet of Everything. Well, welcome to Face2Face. We're joined by a very special guest here with us today, talking about his new film, The Internet of Everything. I can't wait to dive into this for so many, I guess, relational and digital reasons. But we've got Brett Gaylor with us here today on Face2Face. Brett, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, David. I'm happy to be here.
So what's so funny, Brett, is, the interview would have started about 20 minutes ago if we hadn't had so many technical problems. And I'm pretty sure that the most fascinating one was static electricity off your beard. Is that right? Or?
Yeah, well, I know I normally don't have a beard, but I haven't left my house. I haven't left my house for months because I've been editing this film. So I feel like I have the jump on people, but yeah, the beard's getting a little long. Okay. I also have too many computers in this room. So yeah, it took me
surrounded by technology. The ironies abound.
Yep.
So I'm feeling less of a human being because I didn't have diapers that were connected to the internet. Tell me a bit about the film and what you've been doing with your life for the last, I'm going to guess, 10 or 12 years at least, if not more. Oh, and by the way, folks, check them out, brettgaylor.com online if you want to learn more about them. And you're pretty socially mediated, right? You're on Facebook and Twitter and the...
I'm socially mediated for sure. I mean, I have actually been on the internet before there was the World Wide Web.
Are you bragging now, Brett?
It's I was going to say it's a humble brag, but that's just a pretty explicit, full-on brag. Yeah,
I'd say that's pretty explicit.
I have been on the internet before, longer than you.
I bet you have.
And I have always really felt that the internet is kind of the thing that's guided all the work I've done, whether that's been making films or as an activist or, making the internet itself, which I spent 10 years working for the Mozilla Foundation, which are the folks who make the Firefox web browser, which Firefox is actually what became of Netscape, if you ever remember Netscape.
I do remember Netscape.
Yeah. And Netscape came from Mosaic, which was invented by scientists that wanted to help the world share all of its knowledge. So the original kind of ethos of the internet has always really resonated with me and has driven my work. So this film is kind of the third in a trilogy that I've been making about how the internet evolved. When I lived in Montreal in the early 2000s, I made a film that was about the kind of emerging remix and folk culture that the internet was enabling, and also the kind of tensions between people that were downloading all of this. Suddenly all of the world's knowledge was available for free, and that was caused a lot of tension between the cultural industries and this sort of new power and ability we had to share knowledge. So at that time, I was really celebrating the internet and celebrating the ways that it was changing our lives. Like I said, I went to work for an internet organization for many years, and over that time, from when the film came out, which was in 2009, but it took me a long time to make it. So, the early 2000s, then to the mid 2010s. The internet really started to change, and a lot of that was due to the fact that it needed to have a business model, and the business model that became settled on was advertising. And the reason that people like advertising on the internet is because you can, instead of targeting, having an advertisement that's to the world and hoping that it works, you try to target individuals. So I could say I want to target, men named David who live in Toronto who make podcasts, and odds are I would reach you on Facebook. But in order to do that and to know that, I just have to collect a lot of information about you.
Right.
And so this kind of created an arms race online, right? Where all these companies were starting to compete with each other to find
digital arms race.
Yeah, right. Well, it was like, Google was like, no, we have the ways to provide the most relevant content to people because we know what they're searching for. And then Facebook was like, well, we might be able to deliver more relevant advertising because we know what people like and who they're talking to. And then this just sort of began to escalate, and suddenly all this information was being collected about us. And of course that became something that governments could use to surveil us or to actually influence us. And that was the subject of a series that I made in 2015 called Do Not Track, which was a personalized documentary. So it actually used some of this data that was collected about you to make the series. And then, time went by from 2015 to now. What I noticed was that we were entering this phase that the nerd in me wants to call the era of ubiquitous computing, where it's not just, your home computer or your laptop or your phone that's being connected to the internet. Now it's starting to be all of these objects, so you mentioned the internet connected diapers, which is a real thing that I saw when making this film, or probably more relatable to folks are the Amazon Alexas and the Google Homes that seem to be in everybody's kitchen, which is essentially a microphone that's listening all the time and sending data about us to, the richest companies in the world, which if you'd probably asked us 10 or 15 years ago if that would ever happen, we'd be like, of course not. Why would I do that?
Why would I have a microphone built into my toilet?
Yeah. Like imagine if the cops came to you and said like, hey, we're going to put this mic in your toilet in your kitchen, but we'll only ever use it if we need to. Are you okay with that? You'd be like, absolutely not. But
by the way, Brett, when you asked the guy at the CES convention, he seemed a little ticked at you when you asked him the question about the I don't know, maybe
like why would I want? Oh, yeah, the internet.
Like he was surprised.
Yeah,
he was surprised at you. What do you mean?
Yeah,
this is a genius invention.
Yeah, like normally. Well, I guess we actually oftentimes people do bring the internet into their bathrooms, which was his point. He was like, people are already using the internet when they're in here, if you know what I mean.
So why not make it easier?
Exactly. Let's just facilitate that. Let's just make it easier. Let's just put that microphone right in the toilet.
So funny bit. So years ago, I remember, stopping at the odd hotel, driving through the States with my family, and if the washroom had a phone in it, like that was uber cool. Right? If it
really?
Had for me, like, I mean, I'm maybe a little older than you, but I remember also a few years ago doing an event at I don't know if it's called the Trump Plaza here, but anyway, Trump's Hotel in Toronto, and using one of the toilets, and it was probably the closest I could get to the toilet you were talking about with that guy in the film. And I mean, it had a fan and a heated seat and the whole works.
You thought like, man,
this is awesome.
I'm a big deal.
That's right.
And now anybody can do it. You can just shout into the air.
Yes. Well, I mean, come on, Fitbits for your vagina, diapers connected to the internet. I mean, it's pretty wild where we're going. And I think, what I love about your film is it and by the way, congratulations. I don't think I've congratulated you, but I love the film and I hope everybody sees it because there's something really, I think, sensible and fun and balanced about the film, if that makes sense. And I don't mean balance in a negative way, because sometimes balance just means mediocre, and that's not what I mean at all. But you start with this, hey, you remember when this is what the internet was supposed to be, and then you kind of take us through this fun ride of holy cow, is this getting out of hand? Or at least I would imagine as a filmmaker and as you say, as an activist, and I'd love to hear more about that, by the way. But you're getting us to ask some questions that maybe we should be asking a little more often.
Yeah, and I think that was another thing that, well, first of all, thanks for watching it. And one of the things I noticed as I wanted to make it is sort of just at the time that we were realizing that, not all of the things that the internet has enabled or sort of introduced into our society are necessarily positive.
Right.
Hey, we didn't used to be able to book an empty, flat in Paris on the other side of the world instantly for like super cheap. And that is cool. And there are sort of impacts of that we sort of don't necessarily realize until after we've connected that thing. And so that was kind of the thing, that the sort of interrogation and the question that I had at first was like, hey, now that we've noticed that there's some things about the internet that we don't like maybe all this sort of misinformation or something weird happened there with the elections in 20 whatever. And, now that we're noticing that there can be things like filter bubbles where you're getting all your news from maybe not reliable sources. What happens when we do start having some of those impacts and those unintended consequences, really, when they move into maybe more critical things, like the way that our cities are run or the way that we get food or the way that we conduct our democracy. And so that's kind of what I wanted to explore as the film progressed. It does start, in a really silly place, which is the Consumer Electronics Show, which is known as this, the most absurd things are going to be there, but it's sort of a leading edge of
where we're heading.
Yeah, where we're heading. And then through that started to meet some startups, like you said, who were building these products and sort of beginning to wrestle with some of those ethical dilemmas. One of the characters in the film, she has created a fertility tracking device for women to be able to track when they're most fertile, right? Which, women have done forever to be able to sort of track their cycle and all this. But, her point was that the data about that can be really useful to women who are trying to conceive. And it's such a hard thing to do. And there's such an industry that's created from this. Why not give the power to individuals to be able to track control of your body, which is laudable. And then on the other hand, you're starting to see that some of the ways that our bodies are being tracked and monitored are being used in exploitive ways. Insurers are starting to say like, hey, if you wear this Fitbit, we'll offer you a lower rate for your insurance.
Well, the whole CPAP sequence,
right? Yeah, poor guy.
I mean, it's poor guy, and kind of unsettling, really, when you think about it. On one hand, I suppose the insurance companies are raising their hands and applauding because this is going to save them, I suppose, a lot of money in the long run. But on the other hand, I mean, I've got friends who are gleefully, and I might be one of them in the very near future, talking about how they get to track packages that come to their door, and they can watch the FedEx guy or gal come to the door with the box and drop it off and make sure they don't spray paint any graffiti on their door because it's such a common thing, right? I mean, but anyway, very pleased about the fact that they've got a camera in their doorbell.
Well, so
let's fast forward 20 years to everyone with a camera in their doorbell. Well, that's the thing. Now what are we talking about?
And
right?
I'll be shameless here.
You have a camera in your doorbell, Brett?
Well, I did put one there. So we have the film itself, and then we have these additional episodes that we've created more in a YouTube style. I don't know if you've had a chance to see those, but those are going to come out this weekend. And one of them is actually specifically about this phenomenon of the Ring doorbell. So. Right.
By the way, how about a quick plug? Film's going to be airing March 2020 on CBC Gem, right?
Yeah, it's going to be on TV, but also on Gem, so you can watch it at any time. The Internet of Everything.
The Internet of Everything, and you're working on some international distribution, I would imagine.
We are, yeah. No, I've been really excited. This is one of the first films that I've sort of made that's really specifically for TV. We tried to kind of embrace the TV format, so it's in I think it's going to be in Israel and Norway and Spain and.
It's so great. Well, I've got listeners all over the world, so it's let's hope they all get access to. And what's so crazy? I've done, as my listeners know, a fair bit of traveling, and I work in international development. And what's so amazing to me, and this is the laudable side, I think, of this notion of how you end the film. Let's share what we know. I can be in northern Cambodia, in Prevahir, and probably could watch your film.
Yeah, and I think that's we can't
out in a field. Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty darn cool.
It is pretty darn cool. And I think right now during the pandemic, we also realized that like the internet is critical infrastructure to the planet, full stop. We need to make sure everybody has the internet. So this film, spoiler alert, is not saying that the answer to all this, ubiquitous computing and potential for surveillance and terrible dynamics of disruption are the answer is to unplug the internet. It's not. We need the internet to communicate, and it does bring us closer together, just like you mentioned. And I think that this is an age where we need to learn how to respond to crises. We're in one right now. Can you imagine what this would be like without the internet, without being able to find trusted information? Sure, there is a lot of misinformation going around right now, unfortunately. And so, but the answer to that isn't to unplug the internet. It's to create norms and laws and practices and intentions that make sense for the fact that we now live in a world where everything is completely connected. So
you're not Snake Plissken at the end of Escape from LA when he hits the button and it all comes to an end, right? And we got to start over.
I mean, if I could be Snake, I would. I mean, that's kind of a tough trade-off. I mean,
it is a bit of a trade-off.
Such a badass. I mean, if I could be that guy, would I unplug the internet in order to be that guy? Maybe. No, I wouldn't.
Maybe.
You know, and then
that's what I love about your film. I mean, I think this is, because so often, your film, your critique, your questions, your analysis of it could be seen as being, pretty critical, pretty negative, but really truthfully, it's full of hope and it's full of, your comment. We need to learn how to respond to a crisis, and we seem to be doing fairly well at it, I suppose, globally, not in some parts of the world. They're failing miserably, but we seem to be coming around. So ultimately, I guess after this crisis passes, we'll have people that are going to go anti-globalization, and then there'll be lots going pro, right? Look what it did for us. Look what it didn't do for us.
Yeah. I think that, what we're learning right now is that we need to work in unison. We need to work together. And the internet is a tool that facilitates that, right? For sure.
That's great.
So there's that. There's just that, information sharing, organizing. I remember talking to one of my colleagues in the U.S. a few years ago that worked in a different sort of sector of philanthropy, and he said that the internet is kind of like the Ohio of social movements. You sort of need it to win. I was like, okay, that's a pretty U.S. Metaphor, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, sure,
and it is, like we need that.
Yep.
And then one of the places that we sort of went into the film about the way that the internet can actually respond to the climate crisis is not just in connecting us for information, but it actually can allow us to produce physical things in different ways. And so this was this notion that Jeremy Rifkin, who is an economist, I read his books and got a chance to interview him. And he sort of has theorized that the Internet of Things is an infrastructure for what he calls the third industrial revolution. Some economists call this the fourth industrial revolution, but let's just go with the third. And what he's saying is that any kind of industrial revolution will always have three kind of key technologies that will come together, which are communications and energy and mobility and logistics. And so in the first industrial revolution, we had coal was the energy, the railways was the logistics, and the communications technology was the printing press, which was enabled by the steam-powered press from the coal. Boom, that changed the world. That created basically these nation states. This totally basically led to a full embracing of capitalism. The second industrial revolution was largely about oil, and the oil created that was the new energy, and it created the capacity to create the internal combustion engine and the cars. And we saw what that did. It enabled sort of a mass consumption. The television and the telephone were the communications revolution that also connected our world in a new way. And what he's proposing is that what we're entering now is a third industrial revolution where the communications technology is obviously the internet, which is connected everyone around the world. The energy, we are on the cusp of being able to embrace renewable energy. And the thing about renewable energy is that users of the renewable energy become it works like the internet in a way. Like you are the decentralized node of the energy. You can send energy back to people. And then with all of this connection, the mobility and the sort of supply chain infrastructure changes as well, because anybody can access those supply chains in the same way that you can, I can send you a GIF, but now you can access those supply chains. So it could enable tons of new businesses, tons of new ways of getting your goods to market. But imagine what happens when all of that technology is also connected to things like 3D printers, which are essentially the machines that can make stuff. And so if I could use all that infrastructure and I could send you in Toronto, or if you were in Cambodia, my designs for a chair, and rather than having to ship that chair from Cambodia to Victoria, BC, I just basically said like, hey, do you want this chair? And you're like, yeah, I want this chair. I sent you the chair over the internet, and then you printed that chair with your CNC machine or your 3D printer. Think of all of the environmental costs that have just been eliminated or reduced. There's no shipping that thing to the warehouse, and then the warehouse ships it, drives it to the, tanker, and then the tanker sends it overseas.
IKEA out of business.
Well, shit, yeah. And it will put a lot of things out of business, and it will be incredibly disruptive. And this is the age of disruption and resilience that we live in.
And Brett, forget about the chair. How about the miniature heart valve?
This happened. So apparently there was a story about this in Italy, where these fab labs, which is, you'll see them in the film in Barcelona. But
by the way, I love the line. I love the line from How to Make to How to Grow near the end of the film. It's just so cool.
Yeah, Barcelona is really inspiring. They have these fab labs, and they have a goal that they want to do the stuff I was just talking about. They want to have it so that everything in the city is made locally in 40 years, which sounds nuts, but like so did the entire world that we live in right now. It sounded nuts, in the 1980s. And so, what I was saying about Italy was these fab labs, apparently those ventilator machines that everyone's worried that they don't have enough of. Another thing that they don't have is the valves that go in those and then attach to masks on your face. And that's the perfect thing to 3D print, right? It's just plastic that, the machine kind of prints like a dot matrix printer. They got the designs from some other fab lab, and they made them. But then what happened was the person who owned the patent on that design actually sued them, which is such bullshit. But it just goes to show that, like, right now we have these laws and these norms and these systems that are, set up for a different time. And we're now starting to see the same tensions that we saw, with this transmitting of digital information that came up in my film Rip. This is starting to happen with stuff, with like atoms instead of bits, which is totally fascinating and is going to make us live in even more interesting times.
Well, to say that it's going to change everything is the understatement of the century. It's like changing everything on a daily basis, a weekly basis. It's just so, the ubiquity of the ubiquitousness of change. How's that for a phrase? That's a tough one to say. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So here, just before, 2 days before things sort of hit the fan from a COVID perspective, a few days ago, my wife and her mom and her brother, they were going to go to Ireland, walking trip. They pull the plug, and they're kind of feeling, oh, maybe we should have gone. And then within 48 hours, it all hits the fan, and people are coming home. And so it was totally the right decision. 48 hours before that decision, I was, doing something, because I'm a thoughtful husband and stuff. And I sent 3 chocolate bars, local handmade chocolate bars, from a local store to the bed and breakfast where they were going to be staying. And as it turns out, they never arrived. And so Geraldine gets my 31 euros worth of chocolate to enjoy over coffee the morning that my wife and her mom were supposed to arrive. I guess what the point of my story is the fun and the beauty and the simplicity of the internet, and that laudability factor, the goodness that is coming out of this, the global goodness that is coming. I love your phrase about unison speaking and globally gathering. What does that actually mean for us? But you bring something up in the middle of the film that I think, it's around that CPAP situation, the notion of compliance and so on. And somebody talks about legal guardrails, might even be you. And that notion of convenience over nightmare. So let's think about how hard it would have been for me to send 3 bars of chocolate to have communicated that, how expensive that would have been, the phone calls, et cetera, 20 years ago, or well, maybe not 20, but let's say 30. Done in a matter of minutes. I've paid for it. It's there. They've actually handwritten a card. I mean, it's crazy talk, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm boasting, by the way, Brett. So anyway, but yeah, so we got this beautiful thing in front of us, the Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything. There's opportunity and potential, and then we've got our critics, and frankly, we don't need our critics. We don't have to look too far to see how sideways things have gone and can go and seem to be going. And the sequence where you interview that young woman in Asia and China, I believe, and she's so proud, it seems, of everything her government knows about her.
Yeah, this shows she's participating in her city's social credit program, which
is great on one
level, right? It's like so just for folks who aren't familiar with it, in some Chinese cities, and they're starting to implement this nationally.
Karma points?
Yeah, well, there are these sort of points that you get if you behave pro-socially. So they'll give you a point if you exercise, if you reduce your carbon by taking public transit, if you donate blood, if you help seniors, right? You get these points in your app, and then those points can be traded for, like, hey, you can use the local bicycle sharing system for free, or you can trade it in for a book at the library, or whatever, like, that the city can offer for their services. But at the same time, Alibaba, which is kind of like it's like Amazon plus bank plus Twitter plus Facebook all in one thing. They also have a credit system that's based on what you buy and how you behave on that social network. So using sort of inference in the same way that, Facebook infers things that you like from your activity, right? These algorithms. Same thing with, like, you ever watched a show, like a crime show on Netflix, and it keeps recommending those things to you? Well, that's how those algorithms work, right? So that algorithm is saying, like, oh, if this person likes this person, and that person we know is good, and that person we know is bad, they're going to make a judgment about you. Because China's sort of, they until recently haven't had the same sort of credit systems that we've had, right? That are by credit, I mean, like, your credit rating and your credit cards and all that sort of stuff. They haven't had that, so they're like, how about we just use the digital society to do that? And that does sound great, but it also is something that they are using to enforce things that they feel are antisocial, like criticizing your government. So, if everything is controlled by this one platform, and when I was in China, like, cash does not exist, everything happens digitally. Then, you can't buy a ticket for a train, you can't get a mortgage, you're not allowed into this club, you can't get a job, right? And we're sort of, that's an example of
the dystopic edge of it is just. I mean, we're there, we're standing there.
Yeah, we're there. I mean, that does exist on Earth today. It's, if you're in China, you sort of have a different perspective of it, and you think, what's your plan, North America, to address the climate crisis? Let everybody do what they want.
Right,
so it's sort of like you're like, oh yeah, you're right. Maybe being able to drive these huge trucks down the road sucks.
So what I love, though, is, so we're back sort of, I've studied philosophy for years. We're back in an ethical world now. We're talking about legal guardrails. We're talking about, you bring up this notion of data brokers. And I mean, if we're, I don't know, if we're philosopher kings, are we going to be okay? Is that the answer? Like, so as long as it doesn't go sideways, and who defines what sideways is?
Well, we do. And we have, that's the thing. So, I asked Nellie Bowles, who's in the film, as sort of an expert voice. She's a tech reporter for the New York Times. And I, in the interview I did with her, I was like, hey, Nellie, is the internet good or bad? And she's like, you are asking the wrong question. You can't sort of define the internet as this specific technology, dude, in the same way that maybe you did in the early 2000s when you were, like, so excited that you were, 200 people had the web browser that you had. It's just everywhere now. It is embedded in everything. Yep. So what we need is to, like, have our institutions catch up to this new reality, to, like, create, so, like, change happens, according to Larry Lessig, who's in my first film, by these 4 forces that influence people. It's laws, norms, code is one thing that he would say, and markets. So they kind of all work off of each other. So, like, if we all think that it's creepy that Facebook, gathers certain information about us, that's a norm that we just decide, hey, we're not going to share information about our kids, right? And so then they'll be like, oh, maybe we should change a feature. So that becomes the code influencing. And then if all those things are happening, then maybe politicians say like, hey, we should enforce this with a law because that's what people want. And then those people vote for us. So then we have a law. And then if you have the law, that makes it so there's like market conditions for an alternative to Facebook, or that Facebook actually has to respond to the market by changing. And in fairness to Facebook, they have done that, like after Cambridge Analytica and after all this public backlash, which wouldn't happen without journalists and civil society actors forcing them to. It's not, you can't do a lot of the things that you used to be able to do on Facebook. I know this because I made a documentary that was able to get your Facebook data. We got access to the things that your friends liked because Facebook used to allow that in the platform.
Right.
And then they turned that off, And so it's a long way of answering your question, David, but like what we just need to do is make sure that, and you are seeing this in Europe, right? And you are starting to see it in Canada too, and in parts of the US, that like, hey, let's just acknowledge that digital society is civil society now. We can't treat the things that happen online as this sort of separate thing that like only market forces are going to influence, and we have to let Silicon Valley just do what they do because we don't really understand them anyway. And they need to be able to move fast and as they used to say on Facebook, move fast and break things. Like just go. And that, I think those days are over. We have to be able to say like, no, you actually have to, There's laws about how much data you can collect, about how long you can keep it, about what kind of data can be put on a physical device, about what happens with kids, about what happens when, all of these things that we're just sort of starting to realize and sort of grapple with. The challenge, of course, as we all know, is that this stuff moves so fast, but we just can't be despondent about that. We have to just sort of we just have to react. And just in the same way with human rights, you just need a strong civil society, and you need, people that are informed, and you need all the stuff that, every other documentarian that you get to talk to believes around their issue. We need to think that way about the internet too.
Well,
sorry, man, rant over.
No. Wow. Are you done yet, Brad? Holy cow.
Sorry.
So, totally kidding. This is, and what I hate is we're at 32 minutes and we're going to wrap up soon. And so maybe we're going to have to do a part 2. I'm going to go back and watch your other couple films. I mean, for me, this is a university class in the making here. I mean, this is brilliant. It's just, it's wonderful stuff. I love it. So then, you specifically very intentionally show us Barcelona, this middle sort of space. I think what was the phrase you used between a corporate experiment and corporate experiment and a surveillance state, and you show us this middle ground, this beautiful how to make and not how to make but how to grow ground. Mm-hmm. It's not too late then.
I don't think so at all. I mean, I think that. And I hope this isn't interpreted as opportunistic, but I think this moment we are in right now with the pandemic is really like, hey, we need to make sure that the decisions that are made and that we accept are those that are in the public interest. And so that's what I saw in Barcelona, and you see this more in Europe, is that the cities and the entities that are controlled by citizens, they take control of the digital society. So in Barcelona, they actually own the fiber that runs through the streets. They encourage and sort of give economic opportunity to people that are trying to experiment with these new business models and economic models. And they, all the data that's collected by the city is in a sort of a trust. And so that's the kind of middle path, right? It's like, on the one hand, you have, corporations. And I'm not saying that corporations are, don't have a role here, but we just have to recognize when what they're doing is for private interest and to make money,
right?
And maybe those that like profit motive shouldn't be, in control of like things like housing or even.
Well, it's not the only driving factor,
it's
right?
Not the only driving factor.
This is what makes me crazy, is the polarization of pretty much everything, right?
Yeah.
It's either or. Well, hang on. I mean, and I love that, you end the film with let's share what we know, that this whole idea of what the web started out as almost relational in a sense, right? This idea that this, I mean, when you share something, presupposition is you're giving something to somebody else. It seems to me, right?
Yeah,
So
I think
we
that.
start in a pretty good place,
Yeah, and the
right?
thing about that sharing is, I think it was like, I forget which of the founding fathers in the U. It was Jefferson. Yeah, he has this quote that like an idea is like a candle or a flame that like if I light your candle from my candle, the flame doesn't go away. We both still have it. And digital technology is kind of like that. It's a way that you're sharing, but it's not. There's an abundance to it that we have to sort of that can be something that we can harness for the public good, and when we can.
Well, and that's kind of what the folks in Barcelona are certainly looking at, and I'm sure others are too. But the idea of the data becoming a common good, right, and serving the people, right, not just profit. It's about the people.
And look at Wikipedia, like that is probably the best example we have of something that it is in a commons. It is. It is free to the world, and we just can't imagine life without Wikipedia now. It is, it is a global repository of everything that we've ever learned and know, and it's built by people and owned by people. And, great. So that's that's one way that we can maintain and preserve knowledge going forward. Where can we apply some of that thinking into things, the way that a city is run, about the transportation networks, about all these things that the internet is starting to move into, about health, what lessons can we learn from the things that we like about the way the internet is working and how it's enabled, and what are the sort of danger signs that we say, like, hey, that was a shit show. Let's not do that again.
Let's not do that again. And there's somebody near the end of the film, and I can't remember their name, but talking about AI, and the question sort of is, well, hang on a minute. Should we even be going there? Maybe as a better question. Should we even be doing that in the first place? And I think you raise a great question, about the human body. Should it be off limits?
Right. Let's have the question. Let's have the conversation anyway.
Yeah, for sure. So just as we wrap up, I'm really interested to know, of all the bits of business and the pieces of tech that you saw, what did you pick up, or what are you dying to have?
Oh, right.
Yeah. Is it the diaper? Is it that Fitbit?
I wish I bought a drone in China, but I didn't go. I bought the cheap one, and it crashed right away. It feels like it would be useful right about now. Yeah, no, it's a good question. What did I find useful? I mean, hey, Google, what is the most interesting thing that I found on my trip?
Sorry, I'm not sure how to help.
Useless.
That's a perfect way to end a conversation about the Internet of Everything. That's hysterical. Ultimately, Google failed.
Yes, exactly. And if I just walked upstairs and asked my wife, she would have told me, like, yeah. Perfect. She's like, well, she knows, and the kids know that the Amazon Alexa is useless. They like, what they like is the ability to turn the lights on and off. They find that's pretty handy. But you know what? I'm going to plug one of our episodes where we actually look at what the carbon cost of just having an Alexa be at your beck and call, waiting to process this stuff is higher than you think.
Oh, speaking of the extra episodes, we never did wrap up, and that's my fault entirely. But the doorbell camera, you were talking about extra episodes. Is that going to be available? CBC Gem, by the way, folks, it's going to be available pretty much, hopefully, everywhere soon, but definitely can catch it on CBC and Gem online. Tell me about those extras and a little bit about the camera episode, because you were going down a particular path, and then we can wrap up and maybe ask Google another question.
Yeah, so the episode that we did around the doorbell cam sort of looked at these Ring cameras. So Ring is, you've probably seen them before. They replace your doorbell, and you press the button to ring the doorbell, and on your phone or your tablet or your connected device, you can see who's at the front door. Sounds awesome. But what we're starting to see in some communities, particularly south of the border, is that that those systems are actually starting to be used by the police, who can request access to the footage of your phone, right? And so again, you've sort of willingly attached this surveillance device to your house. They create in this app, they sort of connect all the neighbors who also have these. And what some folks are saying is that these are actually leading to much higher calls that are worried about sort of suspicious people in their neighborhood. And those are often people of color. So a lot of the way that these are sort of sold to you is like, hey, see something, say something. If there's someone in your neighborhood that you don't like, you should do this. And that's exactly what we should be stepping away from.
Cultural fear, man.
Yeah,
Cultural
we should.
Fear.
You've probably seen some of this in the last week, right? It's like we should be going to our neighbor and saying like, hey, I don't know you. We've never talked. Are you okay? Cory Doctorow, he has this great thing about, he writes all these post-apocalyptic books, and he has this quote about like, in the apocalypse, do you come over to your neighbor's house with a shotgun or a covered dish? And, if you think that everybody is going to answer that it's the shotgun, then you wouldn't bring the covered dish. But if you just assume, if everybody brings the covered dish, which is like, kindness, then the person with the shotgun will be like, oh, well, they're not a threat. And so eventually everyone will just be kind to each other. And that's kind of what we need to be moving towards, is not, this adopting this sort of mechanics of surveillance. We need to, like lean in first to sharing, and lean in first to being kind to one another.
I knew it. You were just an idealist all along.
Uh-huh.
I knew it.
For sure.
A higher purpose still, I think you ask right out of the gate, don't you, at the beginning of the film?
Yeah, and I think that's what...
No, I love it, man. I call myself a hopeful cynic, and you got to look at sort of what's on the table, what's the evidence saying, what's history saying, etc. It's not looking great on some, but I love, again, I just wanted a shout out again, congrats on the film, and a shout out to the sensible balance and the wisdom behind the way you present this Internet of everything.
Hey, thanks, David. That's really kind. And so shout out to all the folks who made it with me, because I made it with my friends at I Still Film in Montreal, who are an amazing social documentary production company at istillfilm.com. They've got lots of films out right now. And just for listeners, this is a year to support independent makers. We need your help, and we need... we need to know that there's still an audience, because we're not probably going to see you in front of us for a little bit. Who knows how this is all going to play out? It's pretty crazy. Brett, I've had so much fun. I'm watching the time, the counter go by here. Want to keep going, but you know what? Maybe we can work on a part 2. Congrats again. And folks, check it out. CBC Gem online, and it's Brett Gaylor, GAYLOR, yes, brettgaylor.com. Yes.
For more info about Brett. We've been talking with Brett today about his new doc film. Great, brilliant piece called The Internet of Everything. Check it out. Brett, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. That was a fun chat.